I get excited when someone asks me a question and I don't know the answer to it, because usually you'll get a really, really long pause and I'll be like, that's a sign that I haven't broken it down. I was like, you pointed out a gap in my knowledge. And the most exciting moments for me is when I can like break down the anatomy of how the number one rep ran a discovery call, when discovery is an extremely nuanced concept. And then I can take what that Michael Jordan did and I can give it to a insert new rep's name here. And I can see them do something that that top rep did. And that's what gets me excited. And so when you ask about the why behind why I chose the role, is, I'll be honest, like the most boring point for me, Alex, is like once I figure it out.
Welcome to the Rising Leader Podcast, bringing forth the new wave of rising leadership and helping leaders find purpose, connection, and results. This is your host, founder of Alluviance, Alex Kremer. All right, welcome to the Rising Leader Podcast. This is your host, Alex Kremer, and if this is your second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth time listening to the show, welcome back. I'm so pumped and grateful that you are here. I am pumped about this conversation. You most likely know who this person is. You've most likely heard his beautiful and amazing voice online, through podcasts, something along those lines before. The wonderful Armand Farrokh. So first off, Armand, what's up, dude? Good to see you here on this Friday afternoon, this wonderful podcast we're about to crush.
You know, it's so much more pleasant sitting across from you than from Nick, I have to say. Because my co-host, and he has never called my voice beautiful or soothing or anything like that. And here I am just listening to the voice of a man who also has an amazing soothing voice, Alex. And you've been on our show at once, and you're about to record for a second time.
We just recorded it, the second episode 2 days ago.
Oh, amazing. Look at that. See, I didn't even realize. And so you recorded with Nick and Jet.
Yeah, I was confused because I know now you guys are changing, 30 Minutes to President's Club. Now you have the leadership show. Now you have kind of the ones for the individual contributors. I was like, yo, where's my boy Armand? We were going to have 2 talks this week, and then you didn't. You bailed on me, man.
Don't worry. There's going to be a third, and the third one is getting you on our new leadership show with Mark Cosaglow, who I believe has hired you twice. And so that's going to be a fireworks show for sure.
Yeah, he's pumped about that one. I'm glad that you guys are putting him on there. But for those who don't know who you are, I'm going to give just like a little brief background in terms of the I guess I call it the resume, but it's something so much more than just your simple freaking resume here. So Armand, you are the founder of 30 Minutes to President's Club. And what I love about that, beyond just the fact that you guys invited me to be as a guest on your show twice, you guys are diving into sales tactics, sales strategies, toolkits. Correct me if I'm wrong, I think you're the number one sales podcast out there, which is just freaking amazing.
It is.
And just, you guys have had such incredible speakers, and really, you're doing just really good work. And beyond that, you're the former VP of sales at Pave, which is very impressive because you made VP of sales under the age of 30, which I'm going to be honest with you, that was one of my goals and I did not hit it. So I'm going to dive into what you did to get there.
It's okay, man. You'll hear some horror stories. There's a reason you're still in the seat and I'm not, my man. It's okay.
The competitor in me is like, gosh damn it, Armand, you just beat me out of this thing. But beyond that, you're the former sales leader at Carta as well. So you've just been at 2 incredible tech companies, and you're a go-to-market advisor for 3 amazing companies. And, I'm really excited about this conversation because we were talking about, like, what do we want to really be going over? What's part of your message, part of your story? And you're like, it's hard because 30 Minutes to President's Club is such a tactical show that sometimes we want to get a little bit more into the emotional, mental, spiritual journey that one actually goes on. So I'm just like stoked to learn from you and just how you became to be the badass you are. And I'm going to start with like one first question here that's just going to like toss it right over to you. What does it feel like to be Armand Farrokh? Like truly, like you're changing the game of sales. You've had an incredible track record of companies. You got one of the most recognizable sales podcasts out there. Like, what does it feel like to be the dude?
You mentioned that you were going to go in that direction. I didn't know you would literally ask, what does it feel like to be me? And it's funny, man, that here's how I can interpret that question is, what is the situation that I'm in today relative to where I was? So I was a VP of sales, and by all accounts, that is very much a corporate job. That is a W-2 job. And now I'm running my own thing at 30 Minutes to President's Club. So the way I might answer that is, what does it feel like to have walked that walk and stepped away from what is oftentimes the peak of a sales org into running my own business, which is oddly enough a podcast, webinar series, and newsletter. And I'll be honest, man, what happened when I left Pave to become and to go full time on 30 Minutes to President's Club is I was expecting this like massive release of, okay, there's not this pressure of reporting to a board. There's not the workaholic in me that's working 80 hours a week. There's not all of the obligations that come with being a people leader and all of that stuff. But I think what was really funny is that was the case for about a quarter, because I went to Hawaii and I literally laid on the beach and I did yoga and I surfed every day while recording podcasts. But then eventually what I found is I began to seek out a lot of the things that I left at Pave. And that's sort of how I can describe what it feels like to be me today. Is what I learned is when I left Pave, I overcorrected from 80-hour work week, workaholic kind of guy to I'm going to lay on the beach all day, do yoga, go surfing, sip a Mai Tai, record a podcast and chill. And that got boring really quickly. And today I find that I'm in this like really awesome flow state that's between those two, which is, look, I still work weekends from time to time because I care a lot about this business. Every Saturday I go into a coffee shop, I write. During the week, I'm working really hard on the business, but I'm doing it for me because I love to build. And like, that's the kind of person that I am. Is the most excited that I am is I didn't even realize we launched our sales leadership podcast yesterday. The most excited I am is like in the build up to it. And then Nick and I were joking. We're like, oh, wait, that actually launched yesterday. And so what it feels like to be me is like I'm constantly building and trying to do great things that give me intellectual satisfaction while also building other things that aren't related to work, whether that's building deeper relationships, building deeper friendships, and building sides of my personal identity outside of work. That's what the leave outside of Pave has really brought into my life. And that's sort of what it looks like today.
It's interesting to say because I just had John Itel, the chief sales officer at Demandbase, on the show, and he talked about he took a sabbatical, and he's like, it was really hard because the first 2 months, all I ever wanted to do was just continue to do. He's like, we through our corporate jobs, through being a sales leader, whatever you're doing in tech, there's very much an achievement oriented culture. It's like, cool. If you're not doing something, there's usually this like thing in the back of your brain of like, shit, I should probably be doing something. Right now. I should be talking to someone. I should be prospecting. I should be, working on this project, whatever it might be. So it sounds like what you did when you kind of left Pave is you like took it over to the opposite end of the spectrum. You just freaking chilled.
Yeah.
And like, was there value in that at all? Or did it simply just teach you that like, oh, I'm not a person who can just like have all this spaciousness?
Are you familiar with the concept of an elimination diet?
Tell me more.
So an elimination diet is one common one is called Whole 30, which is for 30 days, you cut out everything in your diet that could possibly be causing you any sort of allergy or harm or whatsoever. So it's everything from dairy to acids to processed foods to gluten to everything, even if that doesn't affect you. And the whole premise of it is you're supposed to strip down to the bare, most plain foods that you could possibly eat. And then you're supposed to add one thing back intentionally at a time, so you can see how those things impact you. And I didn't go on an elimination diet, but I did go on an elimination diet with work. And so what I did is I didn't entirely remove work from my life, but I got pretty freaking close to removing it from my life. And the first thing that I did is after I left Pave, I advised them for about a month, give or take, just to get them up and running. And then I left to a surf camp for 10 days. And I literally lived in a hut on the North Shore. And I remember you had to go and charge your phone at base camp, but your tent was completely separate. So you'd have to like leave your phone in this common area. And even if you were in the common area, it wouldn't get any reception. There were no outlets in your tent or anything like that. And so what you find is that the first thing that happens in those couple days is your mind is just processing all of these surface level thoughts, right? What did I do last week? What's the thing that I forgot to do? How am I feeling about Pave? What do I need to do at 30 minutes to President's Club when I go back? And those surface thoughts sort of swirl. They swirl, they swirl, they swirl, they swirl. And then 2 or 3 days go by. And you're like, okay, I can't really think about those thoughts anymore. And you start to like look at the real stuff. And what made it even harder is the people that I was at the surf camp with one was from Australia, one was from the UK. If you mentioned SaaS, they thought SaaS was attitude, right? So like no one even understands the concept of software sales. So like there's no way that I can talk about work. And what you realize in that moment is like, holy cow, I've truly been like so consumed by this thing. And I guess it's time to like figure out what it's like to live on the southern coast of Australia in a town of 150 people and get to know someone in a non-work related context. And those next 7 days, I had so much fun. And I learned so much about myself in terms of how little I had invested in an identity outside of work, that by the time I got out of it, I slowly reintroduced work into my life. But I almost forced there to be white space in my calendar where I was uncomfortable sitting in the nothingness. And I forced myself to fill that white space, not with more work, but with things that were serving me as a human being or bringing new relationships into my life, not just shoving back in a different form of Pave, which would have just looked like 30 minutes to President's Club.
It's a very unique thing working in SaaS. It's like we get so caught up in working in this world that we think everybody gets this bubble. Everybody understands the typology, the requirement that it takes, the pushing yourself, I don't know how many freaking times I've used the word grit in regards to working in SaaS.
Yeah.
And when you go to something, whether it be a surf club or a retreat or just anywhere else, and you talk to people who aren't, you're like, oh, so there's another way to live your life?
Yeah. It's like, oh, you end at 5. Holy smokes. Like, what's that? Never heard of that before.
I have one of my buddies. He's a, what does he do? He's a doctorate of some sort, works as a physical therapist. And he's like, one of the things I love about my job, he's like, I go to my job, I start at 9, I end at 5. And then when I leave, I never have to think about my job. And I was like, that is like the most bonkers thing to me. I'm like, I'm always thinking about not just my full-time job, but like my work in general.
Yeah. It's funny. A lot of people say, don't associate your identity with work. And I actually think it's a pretty big fallacy, because I'll tell you what I've learned after all of this is, and Alex, I'm not the kind of person where I don't want to work. And frankly, I'm not the kind of person where I don't want to work hard. I really enjoy working hard and building. And what I'm not comfortable with is working a 9 to 5 where it doesn't mean enough in my life that I might not think about it after 5 o'clock, right? If I'm not thinking about it at all after 5 o'clock, then that probably means if I did something for 8 hours a day and I don't even think about it a little bit on the weekend, a little bit at night, a little bit afterwards, it means it probably doesn't mean very much to me. And the key thing is that it's called work-life balance for a reason, is during those 8 hours a day or sometimes 10 hours a day, I want to be doing things that aren't pushing me to my edge of humanity where I can't stop thinking about it because I'm so burnt out. I want to have that 8 hours a day be things that I'm excited to work out, that I feel like are pushing me to my edge in terms of what it means for me to fulfill my full potential, right? So that when I'm thinking about them after work, I'm almost excited for the next day. But I'm comfortable enough leaving it and tying it because I have other things that I can do at the end of the day or on the weekend that aren't all attached to this thing. And I hold those things now in equal stature to the things that I'm building at 30 Minutes to President's Club, because 30 MPC is very much still the main event in my life. But there needs to be a co-main event and a co-main event and a co-main event, right? There needs to be your whole like undercard. And that was what didn't exist for me, and now it does.
Mm. What do you feel like you've started to create as other co-main events outside of 30 MPC? Because I resonate so much with it. It's like, I love having something like, I feel this way with Illuvians, and I still work at Catalyst, and like I feel in certain ways with Catalyst. It's like, I love having the thing. I'm like, I'm giving my life to this.
Yeah.
Right. Like, this is why I was put on earth, to birth this amazing thing that others can gain value from.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you almost like disentangle yourself from the burnout, the stress of that? And then also, how do you actually start to find other co-main events, as you termed it?
Yeah. So the Matthew McConaughey, great book, Green Lights. There's a point where he talks about like when you're not sure what to do next, like just start by subtracting. Right. And so let's say you have the main event. The first thing you might choose to do is go on an elimination diet like I did, right? Whether that's vacation or something else. But then the second thing that you should do is you should start to remove all the other like noise and allow yourself to be bored a little bit on the weekends. And I found that there were times where like I would leave a full Saturday or a full Sunday and I would just like leave it untouched. And I'd be like, let's see what happens to my mind. Like when I have like an empty Saturday and I say I'm not allowed to work, right? You'll be interested, like you'll be amazed like how antsy you get, right? And then when you add one more friend interaction, you're like, oh my God, this is amazing, right? It's because it's like, it actually hits the vein again because I'm not so overstimulated with just like stacking my week like crazy. And so the way that I can answer you, Alex, is that I think a lot of times when people are like, okay, so what do you do now? Like, do you surf every day? Do you do yoga every day? Are you doing pottery? I guess that's the new thing nowadays. People do pottery. No, I don't have like a million like fascinating, interesting hobbies. And the reason for that is like, I think what matters much less is what you are doing. What matters far more is who you are sharing those experiences with. And so what I try to do is a couple times a week. First thing I did is I cut out all unwanted social obligations. There are a lot of like acquaintances, or it's like a call here, a dinner here, all of these things that like I almost wanted to do. I just cut all those down. And then what I did is like every Sunday, I spend it with my mom, and I don't look at my phone, turn my phone on airplane mode, what have you. I just sit there, I don't work, and I just hang out with my mom all day, right? That's one thing that I do. On Saturdays, I get together with my childhood friends. And for probably 4 or 5 hours, we get together, we order a pizza, and we play Mario Kart for 4 hours. And it's great. On Fridays, if I want to like go out and meet people, that's usually like my going out and meeting people day, right? But it's like none of these are crazy, high impact, high intensity, massively fascinating activities. What's been most important is I've subtracted all the other noise in my life, and I've figured out like the most important people in my life. And I've said like, because you've removed all the other noise in your life, when you're sitting with those people, you're actually able to like sit and not think about other things, right? You've probably had the situation where you've hung out with a bunch of friends and like, you're not there, right? You're not even like, you're like almost waiting for the next thing to happen while you're at the dinner with the friends. That's a good sign that either one, you should be subtracting that dinner from your life, or two, there were other things in your life that were going on and you should subtract those, because it's not even allowing you to do the thing that you're supposed to be present doing right now.
It's almost like hitting me too hard, like what you're saying right now, because there is this feeling sometimes and we're go. It's like, even when we finally get to the place where we're trying to go, it's like we go on a date with somebody, or we go to an event that we've been looking forward to. It's like once we're there, then it's just like, okay, what's the next thing?
Yeah.
Where it's preventing us from really being present is, I mean, that's the negative side of the achiever mindset. It's like build, grow, attain more.
Yeah.
And that translates to every part of our life. It's just like, if that's how we're showing up in sales, guess what? That's how we're showing up in every other area of our life. It's like, I was at a retreat last week. Actually, this is very interesting. And at the retreat, it was all about, there's a lot of going inward, deep excavation. And Gabrielle Blackwell, who I believe you know,
Yep.
she was at the retreat and she brought these oracle cards. And before each like really deep, like kind of ceremony thing, I'd pull an oracle card. And for 3 ceremonies in a row, I pulled the pilgrim card, let alone there's 50 cards in this deck. And each time I pulled the pilgrim card, I was like, what the hell? Why is this? What is this about? And I'm reading this book it's by a David White book about the identity of the pilgrim. And essentially what it says is your outer world is simply a reflection of your inner world. And it just nailed me so hard of like, if in our inner world we're trying to build so much, our outer world is truly going to be a reflection of that.
Totally.
That's going to prevent us from being present.
Completely right.
So I want to kind of go back a little bit about like where all this came from, because, we talked about you became the VP of sales at Pave, before the age of 30. And this was something that you had mentioned you wanted to do. Like, this was a massive goal of yours, VP of sales under 30. I guess I'd just be curious, like, how did you first off end up doing that? Because I think there's a lot of people who are hungry and wanting to do that. Why did you want to do it? And lastly, was it all it was cracked up to be? Built up to be? Was it? What was it actually like?
Yeah. So let's start with the, normally I would say start with why, right? But let's actually start with the how, because I think I gave you enough of the touchy-feely and the how it felt and all, and we'll get into that in just a second, but let's talk about the how. Okay, so there are a couple things that I think really matter if you want to accelerate your career. And I've thought a lot about how to break this down simply. There are 2 pieces of it. The first piece is you need to be able to identify really good opportunities. And when those opportunities are presented to you, you need to sprint through those doors. And then number 2, when you are put alongside everyone else who has also selected those opportunities, you need to be the best in the world, right? In that domain, in that pool that you've picked. So let's start with the latter, actually. I think there are many things that I'm horrible at. I don't know if anyone's looking at this on video or you've seen videograms of me, right? Like, I don't look like the stereotypical salesperson. I'm not like the 6'7", like tall, charismatic human being. I'm an extremely introverted person, contrary to popular belief, despite the fact that I run a podcast. But I think there are 2 superpowers that I do have. Number 1 is pattern recognition, is growing up as a quieter person, someone who wasn't as like socially comfortable. I used to break down everything from like what backpack strap did the cool kid carry his shoulder on, or if I saw a seller really nailing a negotiation when everyone else is oohing and eyeing, I was like, okay, the first thing they said was this, the second thing they said was this, the third thing they said was this. Let me go watch 10 calls. Every single one of those calls follows the exact same pattern. Every single one. Let me go watch the bad reps. They all follow the same 3 patterns, but they do it the wrong way instead of the right way. I'm like, okay. So now what I've done is I've been able to break down any star performer's best characteristics into 3 steps. And if there's one superpower that I have that I think carries me really well at 30 Minutes to President's Club, is I have that ability to do pattern recognition, right? And I'll explain how this actually gets you career acceleration in just a second. Number 2 is I think I'm reasonably good at motivating people. Whether that's speaking to a room or I took a lot of pride in being able to manage people who are not easy to manage. And usually what you'll find is the number 1 enterprise seller is not an easy person to manage. And if you really want to make it far, for example, Morgan Mello, all-time top producer at Pave, amazing human being, love her to death. She will even admit, I'm not the easiest person to manage. You know why? She's not going to manage someone that she doesn't feel like she can learn something from, right? Is Morgan's a better seller than me. She's the Michael Jordan, and in this case, I'm the Phil Jackson. And what allows me to help motivate her is I can break down what she's doing when she doesn't even realize it and get her to repeat it too. Right. And so it was the combination of my ability to break things down into threes. A cold call is broken down into openers, value props, objections, discovery call, intro, discovery questions, next steps, negotiation, giving the price, handling the first reaction, landing at an ultimate agreement at the end. Everything can be broken down into 3 steps, and each one of those steps can be broken down into 3 more steps, right? What it allowed me to do is when there were moments of opportunity in my career, the head of sales development at Carta left the position. And there were 3 SDR managers running around with their heads cut off. And a new VP of sales, now CRO, came in. And all of the SDR managers were speaking at the tactical level of, we need to make more cold calls. We need to do better emails. They were speaking the one thing at a time. I was the number 1 rep at Carta, and I was known for being an extremely good prospector. And I set up time on his calendar, and I was like, here's the playbook. I was like, here's the playbook you could use to train every single SDR step by step. And here's how I became your number 1 rep. And here's how I could teach it to 30 of your reps. I know I've never been a manager before, but will you let me manage managers and do this for you? Otherwise, you can put me back in the seat. And that was how I went immediately from number 1 AE to what was essentially it was a senior manager role, but I was head of sales development. It was essentially a director role. I was running a team of 30. And it was solely because I had the ability to break things down into a way that anyone could understand. In fact, it was almost a benefit that I was not a talented human being. And then I could break it down to a rep, or I could even break it down to a VP or a CEO level, and they could understand why it was going to work. And that was the sign that I could create predictability in an organization. So that was a really long-winded way to explain how, the things that allowed me to get into this role.
I think the ability to break down complex topics into simple frameworks so that you can teach it is, I would argue, the most important thing that a sales leader can do. Probably any leader, not even sales leader. Especially if you are training an SDR team or an SMB team, for sure enterprise, but like it's something that very few people actually have the ability to do. And sales professionals are hungry for that shit.
Yeah.
Like, teach me the frameworks that insert product here, insert value prop here, I can close a deal because I know the different stages that it takes. Would you say that you developed a passion for that? Or was that was that just something you're just like, man, I just like this and I like teaching it? Was that always kind of how you were?
Yeah, I'm a little bit of a nerd about the craft of sales. And the reason for that is I get excited when someone asks me a question and I don't know the answer to it. Because usually you'll get a really, really long pause and I'll be like, that's a sign that I haven't broken it down. I was like, you pointed out a gap in my knowledge. And the most exciting moments for me is when I can like break down the anatomy of how the number 1 rep ran a discovery call, when discovery is an extremely nuanced concept. And then I can take what that Michael Jordan did and I can give it to a insert, new rep's name here. And I can see them do something that top rep did. And that's what gets me excited. And so when you ask about the why behind why I chose the role is, I'll be honest, like the most boring point for me, Alex, is like once I figure it out. So I figured out, I became the number 1 rep at Carta about 6 months in. And those first 2 months I sucked at it, but I just broke everything down. But then once I figured out the machine, I was just cranking the wheel. I think I did like something like 350% in my last quarter and got paid more doing that job than I was as the head of sales development, but I didn't care. Because it wasn't exciting to me because I had figured out the job for myself. And I knew that if I just kept doing this job, I would continue to perform well. The most fun thing is figuring out how to figure out reps and figuring out not only the concepts that would break down the sales thing, but then translating those to a rep and letting them fit within the framework, but still develop their own unique style. And once they found their style, while still keeping the fundamentals of like, you got to set an agenda, right? You got to get people talking on a discovery call, but they figure out how to do it their way with the right nudging and guidance. Once it locks into place, that magic moment when you almost see it snap in and they're like, oh, I get it. That's the stuff that's so addicting to me. And it's even more addicting when you see it happen at the scale of 30 or 40 reps when you're at the director, VP, and beyond level.
Yeah. So let's dive into that right there, because I think that goes into like what did it end up being a VP of sales, or even just being a leader? Because I feel like before we move into leadership, we have these big grand ideas of what it can be. Like today, I actually even interviewed a current SDR. We're going to bring on an SDR manager, and he gave a big presentation on what he's going to do. And I'm like, I know where you're coming from right now, because your eyes are much bigger than your stomach, i.e., this is a lot of work that you're talking about right here.
Yeah.
And so when you ended up going in and running the team, building out the company and the sales, how was that hard? Was it as awesome as you thought it was going to be? You talk about like being able to coach the individual to allow them to both be themselves, yet also be able to apply this framework that you're teaching. What's it like?
Yeah. So there were parts of the job, not to give a lame answer, there were parts of the job that I loved. There were parts of the job that I didn't love. I think the more interesting piece is there were eras of the job that overall in the entirety I loved. And then there were eras of the job that in large part I hated. And I think that's the slightly more interesting story to be told, which is probably the single best year of my career was the early days of Pave. So I joined Pave at $100,000 of ARR, about 100K. And
damn, that's early.
That was early. Yeah. And so it was the beginning of Q4 of 2020. We finished that quarter at 400K. So we grew by about 300K off of 2 reps, me plus our other first sales hire. Then from there, the goal was the year of the 10X. And so if we went from 400K to 4 million ARR, that would put us in the top decile of not just like startups, like Andreessen-backed startups, like blue chip startups. And by the end of the year, we hit 6. So we blew out target by 150%. And I'll tell you what was most exciting about it is we went through like 3 phase shifts as a sales organization. The first phase shift was basically doing extended founder-led sales. And that was basically me working with my CEO to find product market fit and basically having him be my sales engineer on every deal. And that was so much freaking fun because it was company building. It was product building. I was like basically a second or third founder at the company. And we were building the product through sales. The second piece was building the first part of a culture, right? And so picking those first 3 or 4 sales reps and seeing what happened when you added one person. When you add one person to a team of 2, it becomes 3. Obviously, there's math. But what you realize is literally 50%, your team has grown by 50%. And that means your culture can grow or shrink or be imploded by 50% as well, depending on who you hired. But those first 4 hires, man, just magic. Every time we brought someone on, usually what you see is like as you throw more bodies at the problem in sales, the team gets worse, right? As we brought on more hires, we were building out this magic roster of world-class club caliber sellers who also were still acting like founders. And that was the last phases. When we had that team of 6 or 7 by the end of the year, and it was just popping off. And I remember we were about to hit 4 million, just entering Q4. And we were like, we're going to blow this thing out of the water. And I've never seen a team so stoked to like every single new person they hired. The moment we hired someone, they're like in their second week, they're like, can I close a deal? Can I add to the $6 million pot? And when we hit 6, literally on the last deal of the year, everyone was just like, we all got together, we were hugging it out. It was easily the most fun I've had in my entire career, hands down.
Man.
It was unbelievable. Where it got hard is when the job turned in 2 forms. Number one, it started to become a lot more of a holy cow, the market's crashing and we were still doing well, but it became more about finding answers for the rest of the executive team and understanding the market and trying to pinpoint, is this an economy, a product, or a sales execution issue, and spending more time reporting than actually solving the problem. And then number two, the process of just like adding more people and adding more and more and more and more people than frankly I wanted to, right? That was the process where it lost its luster for me, because we went from the magic team to the, oh my God, this thing's going off the rails kind of team. And it feels like the culture is becoming a little bit of a sacrifice, right? And that's where it lost a little bit of its luster for me.
That's such a hard stage of a company. I felt something so similar when we were at Outreach. You know, when I remember we hit 50 million at the very end of Q4. It was like one of the last deals that got us to pass 50 million. And it was unbelievable. Like there was champagne in the office. People were cheering. Like everybody who was like there was just like felt in it, was so enrolled of just like, man, like even kind of similar to what you said at the beginning. It's like their identity was tied up in the job. Like this, man, company's doing great. Therefore I'm doing great. That was such a wonderful experience. But then when it gets to the point that you're trying to scale a company, that's when it becomes really, really hard. Because it's almost like leadership is, I don't want to say you're having to use people, but there is a feeling of like, okay, let's use these people so that then we can just blow out our numbers, so that we can keep on growing, so that we can then show investors we're good, so they'll invest more money, so that we can go public. It became this like hard, like, this isn't fun.
It becomes a math equation where people are the numbers in the equation. And it's like number of people times quota equals your capacity in the team. And it's like, if you're doing over 100%, higher, because that means you have excess capacity. And it was like, okay. And so my job now becomes basically like, I just need to make the capacity model true, which is when we hire a rep, they hit quota, which means I just need to do pipeline reviews up the gills to make sure that when we add someone, all deals are being managed with the same level of rigor, because we're hiring people so quickly, and you lose a lot of the slack in the line that allows you to have these breakout stars, because you're allowing for that creativity and that time for like people to find their own unique selling style to actually happen. And I'm not saying those things aren't important. I'm all for having rigor and process, and I'm an extremely operationally minded, process driven person. But I think there's a point where you're choking your deals so hard that you actually start to see diminishing return, because the organization starts to focus more on the cleanliness of pipeline, is my med pick filled out, than actually working the deals and making sure that they are being pulled over the line.
That's good right there. You're throttling the creativity of reps, because you say, hey, in order to be scaling this company, everybody needs to be doing the exact same thing, saying the exact same talk track, doing the exact same demo flow, doing your deals exactly like this. And where there's value in that, it's almost like that's making it so that the people who maybe are not the best performers, they're going to be adequate enough to get the job done. But the people who are the lone wolves, who actually can get it done doing their own way, you're preventing them from being their most authentic expression of themselves, which causes resentment. It's not fun.
Yeah, it's it becomes we called it the cling to the middle strategy. Just like get enough capable people running the playbook, and we'll get to the number. Just like get them running the playbook. Don't take any crazy risks. And like, that's where I'm like, we got to 6 million off of a team of 6, and more than half of that team had been hired in the back half of the year. Like the capacity model would have said you needed 10 reps to hit that number. But what happened is like those early 4, frankly, just made magic happen. And in Q4, Morgan Mello closed $750,000 as a single rep. This is a mid-market rep at the time. Our next 2 reps closed $500K at pop. Mid-market quota was $250, right? And they were just making magic happen. And I think a lot of people are realizing that today, is that more reps doesn't mean better. And now the market's actually overcorrected, which is the value of an elite rep is actually 3x the value of an average rep, because they're going to take the small amount of inbound leads there are, and they're going to close them at double the win rate, right? And they're also going to cost you less, including less dollars and less management overhead and less culture overhead as well.
Yeah, there's the fine balance of how do you scale a company with more heads while also be keeping your reps fat and happy so they're actually winning a lot and they're working on the right deals. It's a hard equation to solve for.
Yeah.
So we kind of touched on this a little bit at the beginning, but how long have you now officially been full-time at 30 MPC?
It has been since the beginning of the year. So today is October 13th when we're recording this, and I left Pave right at the end of the new year. So call it January, February, if you count the advisory period.
So we'll say 10 months. 10 months. There's a lot of people right now who are doing some sort of side gig or thinking about doing some sort of side gig. And even if you don't even have a freaking side gig, there's a lot of people who are starting to post more on LinkedIn because they say, I know I need to develop my brand because I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but I know I need to. I'm going to do something with it.
Yeah.
And so often people are at a race to get out of their W-2.
Yeah.
Right. I'm hearing it more and more, right? When I talk to people about, coming to the Rise Immersion, a lot of people, when I say, what's your 3-year vision? They're like, I want to be working for myself. This has happened more than ever before, just because there's more opportunities to be doing it. There's more examples where it's happening. But where I feel like what you've really done is you honored your time in your full-time job at Pave, at Carta, and that prepared you to be able to make the step. So how did being a SaaS sales leader, a SaaS sales professional, how does that translate into being a founder of 30 MPC and fully fucking going for it on your own?
It's so to everyone who's thinking about doing going full-time on your own thing, this is where it is important to ask yourself why. And just because you don't like your job does not mean that you should go do it, because there are a heck of a lot of miserable stories around people who are shackled to their business. And it's very easy to switch jobs. It's really hard to switch businesses. And a great example is if you ever look at the life of someone who is running their own restaurant, it is usually not a particularly fun life. They're usually chained to their own restaurant. And so just know that just because you own your own business does not mean that it is an enjoyable thing. There have been times where I've been chained to 30 Minutes to President's Club, and I'm like, holy cow, if we don't sell this sponsor deal, that means significant things for me personally. That's a little bit scary, right? But what I will say is, how has it prepared me for this is, originally we started as a podcast. And what you need to think about is what are the skills that I'm getting professionally today that could be used to build a business? So at the beginning, sales is the art of asking questions. And so there's a reason you can do these interviews, man. All you've done before is you've done discovery calls where you're literally getting other people talking, right? You have an unfair advantage as a seller. You also have industry or domain expertise, being both a leader, so you can talk about these more leadership type of topics, but also being a domain expert in sales. So those things were two extremely helpful things for me. But then what I'll also tell you is that sales is one of those careers where you could take it anywhere, man. We prospect big name guests, right? So Nick cold called Jeb Blunt, the author of Fanatical Prospecting, to get him onto the show, right? And he was the biggest guest we had in a long time. We oftentimes are prospecting our sponsors. The way that we run our business is we sell 30 MPC sponsorships like a SaaS subscription. So you can't just sponsor one webinar. You have to go for a year. And we run all of our projections and our financial reviews like we're looking at a SaaS ARR model. And it's all of these things that we're compounding from my time as a VP of sales that I've been able to use to basically turn 30 MPC into a software business that just has the mask of a media business, right? And it starts with just taking the one or two most important things that you spike hard at. Yeah, Nick is obviously an amazing salesperson. For me, I was really good at breaking things down, right? And I was pretty damn good at asking people questions and getting them to talk, and half decent with a mic, right? And you can start a business off of only one or two skills, because usually you're best in the world at only one or two things. So start a business or take one step forward on your business using the one or two skills that you feel like you have the superpower in. And then you can pull in all of the other things that you've learned in life to create unfair advantages in your business.
Let me ask you this. So I had a therapy session 2 days ago. Shout out Shirley. She's been with me for 3 years now. And one of the things that, she really talked about was happiness is simply letting out and being the most authentic version of yourself, allowing the unique flavor of you to come out. And so I'm curious, now as you are doing this full time and running that, are you happier?
Oh yeah, I'm stoked. It's I'll tell you, there are a couple things that have come with hitting 30. At some point, I would like to write a book called "Holy Cow, I'm 30" on quarter life crises, because I think I went through probably every quarter life crisis you could have probably gone through. Like if you just take the list, and in a relationship, left your corporate job, lived in Hawaii, started your own business, rethought all of your personal relationships. In a week, I'm moving to New York, right? It's like everything you could possibly go through in a quarter life crisis, I've gone through it, right? And the reason for that is when you're 30, you have this look in the mirror moment. And this is what I had when I was a VP of sales, which is like, I don't regret a thing, man. I worked really hard, harder than the vast majority of people out there. And like for anyone who thinks it's bad to work hard, you can go like whatever you want, right? But the reason that I'm able to do the things that I did, that I'm doing today, the reason that I'm able to be financially independent, run my own business, do the things that I love, leave early to go to yoga class because Nick's going to understand and we have an okay business on our hands, right? Is because I worked so hard in my 20s. And there was a look in the mirror moment where I was like, okay, I've reached the pinnacle of the sales org. And do I want the next 20 years to look like the last 10? Do I want 30 through 50 to look like 20 through 30? And the way that I answer that question is, if I continue to work from 20 to 30, or if I continue to work from 30 to 50 the same way I worked from 20 to 30, how different would my life look? And honestly, it wouldn't look that different. It would be like going after the CRO chair. So I'm like one step up. I was like, I went AE to VP in like 6 years, right? So now I'm going to spend 20 like crawling to CRO and doing that 4 or 5 times. Who wants to be the 5-time CRO champ? That job just sucks.
That job does sound fucking hard, dude.
It sounds horrible, man. I don't like, you never meet a partner of a law firm who's happy. I don't know a whole lot of CROs who love the job and say they want to do it for 10 more years. They're like, I got maybe one more in me and then I'm good, especially now. And what I'll tell you is I'm so grateful that I figured this out at 30, because I was like, hey, I can now reap everything that I did in my 20s. And I can put that in my back pocket because my career is in a really good place, and still like chip away at my career and still build a lot while also aggressively attacking personal growth. And I never want to be that person who, oh man, you look back when you're 65 and you're like, all the things that I wish I did, right? I never want to be that. And that was the moment that I had when I turned 30, is I was like, you are on the path to be that right now, dude. And you better stop. And I'll tell you, man, it's been so much fun. I'm working on things that I love, but more importantly, I have so many more people that I love in my life that I actually have room for, that make the work that much more enjoyable when I do choose to sit down at the keyboard or with the notepad.
So well said, man. So well said. Well, I've got one more question here for you. But before I ask you, I just want to acknowledge you, brother, just for, man, you got some wisdom. And it's very enjoyable to be able to receive from that. And, so much of what you said based on your own personal experience and your own trials, but your own successes. And I resonated a lot with them. And so I'm just grateful for you to be on here and to share that message. And honestly, man, like, you're moving out to New York. I just moved out of New York after 2 years. Like, you're about to go on an epic adventure. And I just know from personal experience that city does something to you. And I know it's going to do something big for you. which I can't wait. So here's my final question for you. The show is called the Rising Leader Podcast. What do you view as the rising leader?
One thing that I would always look to spot in people is a lot of times what people do is they focus so much on learning the rules of what it takes to do a pipeline review, what it takes to forecast, what it takes to have a one-on-one, what it takes to do this, what it takes to invest in your team, right? And what happens is they do the table stakes everywhere in the organization. They just become like a good manager, right? And then they become a good director, and then maybe they become a good VP. And when I think of the rising leader, I think of someone who is rising, obviously, and rising quickly. And the things that I would look to spot are as follows. Usually when you find someone who has risen the ranks really, really quickly, they are rarely good at everything. In fact, they usually have some glaring gaps. I'll give you an example. When I became the head of sales at Pave, I had never formally rolled up a team forecast yet, which is wild. Because I was running like SDR and SMB, and I was like rolling up manager level forecasts, right? But the number one thing that you should look for is who spikes so freaking hard in one or two things that it makes up for all of the other deficiencies. There are certain, I think of this in the context of sports oftentimes, there are certain fighters that if you take them down, they're done, right? But as long as they learn some takedown defense, they're not horrible at it. If you're on your feet with them for more than a minute, you're going down. I will bet on that fighter any day over the person who's an okay striker, an okay wrestler, an okay something else. What you need to get really good at to be the rising leader is figure out what you are best in the world at. Spike freaking hard in that, and then hire people to cover the things that you're not good at, or get minimum viable good at those things so you can play basic defense, but do not spend your time working on those defensive areas. Spend your time punching through the things that you spike at and selling yourself and building a brand about yourself around those things, because that's the only way you're going to break through the pack. You can't be above average in everything. You have to be outstanding in a few things.
Damn. That's what I'm talking about right there. That was a good mic drop to this. What are you really good at, and be fucking exceptional at that? Man, Armand, I appreciate you, man. Thank you for sharing your heart, your soul. If people want to get a hold of you, what is the best way to do so?
Find me on LinkedIn. And I also write the 30 Minutes to President's Club newsletter. So if you just go to 30mpc.com, if you want to hear some of my crazy thoughts, we also distribute all of our content through there. Just go to 30mpc.com. Some sort of pop-up will tell you to subscribe to the newsletter, so you can find us there too. All right. And go check out Alex's episodes on 30mpc. They're some of the best. Holy smokes.
I appreciate that, man. Well, Armand, thank you so much, my friend. And for all those who attended, if you know somebody who needs to hear this, and I know you do, make sure you hit that share button and make sure you just subscribe to the Rising Leader Podcast. But with that, have an absolutely wonderful day. Thanks for listening to the Rising Leader Podcast. Make sure you hit that follow button so you get notified every time a new episode releases. If you know someone who wants to take their lives and their career to the next level, send them this episode so we can all rise together. For more information, check out alluviance.co. We'll see you next time. And in the meantime, keep letting it flow.